Paul George is opting out of his $48.7 million player option with the Clippers, making him an unrestricted free agent. That's been confirmed by our NBA insider Bill Reiter. George is reportedly setting meetings with teams, including the Clippers, once free agency officially begins at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday. Bring in NBA analyst and writer Brad Botkin for more on this. Brad, there were three things that were potentially going to happen here when it comes to George. Now we know that he's going to opt out. President of Basketball Operations Lawrence Frank said, look, we'd love him to stay, but if he leaves, full respect. What's your reaction to his decision to opt out?
I'm not surprised by this. He has said all along that he wants a max contract, and the Clippers have sort of tried to engage in a staring contest with him and sort of dare him to go to one of these teams with the room to sign him because they don't want to give him any more than they gave to Kawhi Leonard. 3 years. They don't want to go the full max. I still suspect that when he holds them to the fire, which I think to some degree this is still a negotiating move. I don't think the word around the league is that he really wants to leave LA, but he wants the max deal. He's not willing to compromise. And since there is that team out there, the Sixers, you know, we heard, Jeremy, a few weeks ago that the Sixers were out on Paul George, or at least cooling was the word that was used. I never understood that. I don't think that was real beyond the sense that maybe the Sixers were starting to get the idea that he wouldn't want to come. But there is absolutely no reason why the Sixers would ever be cooling on Paul George. There has never been a more perfect fit. They have saved up all their cap space to be able to make a run at him. He's a guy who can legitimately put them over the top in the title contention conversation. So they've been viable in my mind all along. And now Paul George, he was trying to put some pressure on the Clippers in other ways, but now he's bringing the 76ers back into this fold along with a few other room teams to force the Clippers, or try to force the Clippers, to not lose him for nothing.
Yeah, so obviously that begs the question then, what's the next move for the Clippers if the Sixers do come back into this conversation?
You know, it's difficult because this team has proven that they're probably not a championship contender, and I suspect that's why they don't want to go all in on these guys. If they go full max with Paul George, he's going to be in there at 38 years old making over $50 million a year. These guys have not proven to be able to stay healthy in terms of Kawhi Leonard. James Harden is on the downslope. Now, the caveat to all this is that they're going into a new arena, and they want to open that with a bang, and they want to be a competitive team, and at least on paper say they're pursuing a championship. So there were some other options here in terms of an extend and trade, where he could have extended for up to 3 years and then gone out and gone a trade. So, you know, the Clippers are going to have to decide if they just want to kind of say, screw the money, we have to put this team on the floor, open up the building, and be competitive, and we're just going to have to dig into our pocketbooks and also deal with the roster construction ramifications of going over that second apron, which are pretty bad. They can really inhibit the way you can build your roster. So they're going to have to decide between that and potentially losing him for nothing. One option that is still on the table is him opting back in with or not opting in, but signing a max deal with the Clippers and having it be a sign and trade where the Clippers could at least get some value back for him.
If he does manage to walk, what do the Clippers do here?
Oh man, it's tough, because then, you know, James Harden becomes, they already signed Kawhi Leonard. That's where this gets really dicey. The Clippers are trying to play hardball here, saying we don't want to give you a max contract, but that's the question, Jeremy. If Paul George doesn't come back, they're probably not for real, even with Paul George. If he doesn't come back, why would you pay, you know, what are you going to pay James Harden? How much are you going to invest in this team that you weren't even really willing to invest in with Paul George? So there's a lot of optics right now. They're kind of trying to play like they're contenders, but the truth of the matter is they don't really believe they're contenders right now, or else they'd be throwing the max at Paul George, no questions asked. They're kind of trying to have their cake and eat it too. We don't think we're a full contender. Let's not pay him the full max and call his bluff. I think they're in a really, really difficult position if he just says, you know what, I don't want to leave LA, but you forced my hand. I'm going to the Sixers. They lose him for nothing. And then it's like you pay James Harden to come back and be a play-in team. Very tight spot for the Clippers, and they sort of made their own bed. They could have paid Paul George the max a long time ago, and he realizes that. And now he's going to hold their hand to the fire and go out and bring some other teams into the fold for some leverage and force them to make that exact decision that you just asked me, Jeremy.
Yeah, let's discuss those other teams, Brad, because you mentioned the Sixers, but there are teams that do have the space to spend the money, and the reports are that he's setting meetings with teams that do have that room. What other teams could he be looking at?
Orlando can, I believe, can get over $50 million in cap space. OKC can pretty easily get to a maximum level contract option, and that's pretty enticing. Paul George going back to OKC, that's a team that's right on the cusp of a championship. There's some familiarity there from a franchise standpoint. Any team that either has the space, I mean, forget like Detroit, Detroit has space, but any team that can reasonably be either a contender or a young team like Orlando that Paul George could turn into a top 4 seed and try to make a push, those teams are going to be held against the Clippers. Anybody with the viability to bring him in is going to force the Clippers to make a decision. So you're looking at teams like OKC, Orlando, certainly Philadelphia. I think the Warriors are probably out. There have been a lot of talks about the Warriors possibly getting into the Paul George business if he had done an extended trade. But I think now that it's going to be a max deal one way or another, they don't have the space to sign him. So it would have to be a sign and trade with the Clippers. And I just don't think the Warriors want to take on that much salary. A 3-year extend might have been different. But don't rule anything out. Maybe the Warriors on a sign and trade. But I would look at Orlando, Philadelphia, and OKC as at least on paper right now. But Jeremy, with players like Paul George and in tight situations like this that start happening very quickly, phone calls start happening very quickly, we've seen teams come out of the woodwork. I mean, I remember when Donovan Mitchell was like a cinch to go to the Knicks. And all of a sudden, here comes Cleveland. Where did they come from? And he signs there. So there's like, you always have to hold out for that possibility that somebody comes to the forefront at the 11th hour, makes a deal. But those are the 3 teams, Orlando, Philadelphia, and OKC, that on paper seem like the likeliest candidates to put some leverage or some pressure on the Clippers.
But that's why we love it, Brad, because sometimes you just don't know. We just don't know what's going to happen. Free agency kicks off tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern time, but we already know Paul George, unrestricted free agent. Brad Botkin, our NBA writer and analyst, joining us to discuss George opting out of his $48.7 million player option with the Clippers. Boy, that's going to make things interesting. John Gonzalez said earlier on HQ, hey, we got to wait for the George domino to fall, and then things are really going to start moving in terms of free agency. So we'll see what the implications are moving forward. As you take a look at the odds to win the Western Conference, there's the Clippers at 12-1. You wonder what that's going to look like now if Paul George is not a part of this team. The Nuggets, the favorites to win the West, at plus 380.